What is going on, everyone? Let's talk about a city that I have personally had the best Mexican food ever in, El Paso, Texas. El Paso is right here in case you don't know. The Sun City is its nickname, and there's a good reason for that. It's sunny all the time, it seems like there. El Paso was settled in 1680 and incorporated into a city almost 200 years later in 1873. El Paso isn't terribly large. It only has about 683,000 residents, and when you figure in their entire metro area, it's about 850,000. So it's not a giant metropolis like New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago, but it's decent size. The city has some serious history also that includes the first meeting of a US president and a Mexican president in 1909. Find it hard to believe they didn't get together until then, and I'm sure before that they didn't have presidents and all that other stuff in Mexico, so there's a lot of reasons behind it, but it just seems a little late in the game to finally get these two together. El Paso really didn't grow too much until after the Civil War. Then it became pretty much a legitimate city. Serious growth after that. Despite being a border town and right next to one of the most dangerous towns in Mexico, which is Juarez, El Paso is a relatively safe town. It's a great family town with good weather and a decent education system, so it definitely isn't the worst place to live. There's a ton of videos on YouTube that show how wonderful El Paso is, so they really show a good side of El Paso. This isn't one of them. My videos are normally about things you should know before you relocate someplace. No place is perfect. That's just a fact. So if you watch the video and want to explain why I'm wrong because you think it's a wonderful place, stop typing. It is a wonderful place. But again, no place is perfect. That being said, why don't you grab some nachos and watch my top 10 reasons not to move to El Paso, Texas. Number 10. It's a family town. El Paso is one of the best major cities for families. There's a ton of families and family activities in this city. While this may be good for most people, this could steer other potential residents in a different direction, like a Tinder date with a cold sore. Believe it or not, the Sun City is so much of a family-oriented city, it could potentially turn some people off. Normally this is younger, single adults, but still, some people don't want to move to a place like this because of that. A recent poll showed this was a concern with younger millennials. They're also really concerned with, is it dog friendly and what's the best cell service there? So yeah, that's what you're dealing with. Number 9. It's dry. Holy crap is this place dry. Being in the middle of the desert, El Paso doesn't get much precipitation. Overall, the city sees about 9 inches of rainfall annually. In Oregon, we see that about every 3 days during the wet season. So very, very dry conditions. You'll have to drink more water and have a good skincare regime. Like I've always talked about, use lotion, use sunblock when in the sun. Sunscreen, people. Nothing worse than getting your senior discount at a movie and you're only 31. Then the cashier says, don't forget to show your AARP card at the concession stand so you can get 30% off a soda. You say, I'm only 31. And then the kid smiles at you and gives you a wink and a very jaded grin. Never a good feeling. Wear sunscreen, especially in El Paso. Number 8. The scenery. There's not much to see around El Paso. The city is nice, don't get me wrong, but the city is in a desert and a not very pretty desert at that. All you'll see on a hike is dirt, rocks, and smog, which to many people isn't really appealing, and I'm one of them. I'm not a desert type of guy. I've seen beauty in the deserts before, but don't get me wrong, Utah, New Mexico has some incredible landscapes. The El Paso area isn't like those. It looks more like the parking lot of a swap meet in a Mad Max movie. The desert around here always reminds me of that road out to Vegas from Los Angeles. It's just miles and miles of nothing. I've always wondered about some of those houses that you see off the road, you know, miles away from everything, about 100 yards off the highway, and they're abandoned, look like they've been abandoned for a decade or two. I always see those things and I think to myself, well, at least I'm not the worst decision maker on the planet. Number 7. It's a border town. In recent years, depending on where you lie in the political spectrum, this may sway your decision to live here. El Paso is a border town with Mexico just on the other side. Now, there's a lot of Mexican people here and a lot of Mexican culture, and that's great for about 90% of us. Then you have that 10%. So let me put it to you this way. If you've ever been someplace and chanted, "Build that wall," while wearing a red hat, El Paso may not be the place for you. If you're like me and you've been, let's say, married to a Mexican woman for 20 years, it should be no big deal. But like I said, if you're the type of person that maybe drops the A and just goes with America, you may want to put down stakes a little north, like Maine. Number 6. The The weather. The weather can be pretty brutal in the Sun City. The average winter temperature is rarely under 40 degrees, and in the summers, temperatures can rise up into the hundreds on a regular basis. This is crack sweat weather. Stop typing. Anyone 10 pounds overweight knows exactly what I'm talking about. The hottest season lasts about 4 months, from May 16th to September 11th, with an average daily temperature being around 89 degrees. The hottest day of the year is June 22nd, with an average of 98 degrees Fahrenheit with a low of 73 degrees Fahrenheit. So, in a nutshell, while living in El Paso, the weather person says the word sweltering a lot. The smart people see a lot of movies during those months. Movie theaters always have the best AC. I mean, how else would you get people in to see a Nick Cage movie these days? Number 5. Housing. Housing prices are a great reflection of how a city or town is doing. If housing prices are too low, it can be scary, and there's a reason for it. And there's always a reason for it. And that reason is crime. Okay, maybe not always. This time it's not. If you've been following along, El Paso isn't some crime-infested hood with cars on fire that nobody bothers putting out. They just let them burn down as a one-legged dog limps by on the cold streets of El Paso. No, it's not like that. It really isn't. It's not that bad of a place. But, like I said, crime's normally the problem, but it's not the problem in El Paso. Maybe they're too close to Mexico. I don't know. Looked into it. I couldn't really have a definitive answer why it's so cheap there. The median home price in El Paso is about $120,000 for a house. That's 35% lower than the national average, while the average amount of people per household is 15% higher than the national average. That means you have a lot of rundown homes with like 10 people living in them. Only about 50% of the residents own their own homes. Now, they have a lot of renters, obviously. Normally, when I see really low home prices, you have really high home ownerships. Not in El Paso. They got their own agenda going on. Number 4, floods. El Paso experiences floods at least once a year. The city is in the middle of the desert and it doesn't receive very much rain. When they do, it's usually too much for the city to handle, resulting in floods, which leads to power outages and potential water damage to homes and vehicles, etc., etc. So make sure you add flood insurance to your insurance. It's not that expensive. It's totally worth it. Number 3, employment. Like I said, El Paso is a great town with not a lot of knocks against it, especially considering how close they are to one of Mexico's most dangerous cities. One of those major knocks is employment. A good job is hard to come by in El Paso. The unemployment rate is about 4.5%, while the income per capita is about $20,000, leaving about 21% of the residents living in poverty. That's 39% higher than the national average. Now, if you're younger and watching this and still live with, let's say, your parents or something like that, you might not know this, but in today's economy, $20,000 isn't much. Let me explain it to you a little bit better. That means if your computer breaks, you may have to save for, let's say, 3 years so you could play Fortnite on a decent rig again. Number 2. It's secluded. El Paso is relatively secluded from any bigger U.S. cities. San Antonio is about 7 hours away. However, you'll have to go to New Mexico for anything closer, like Albuquerque. It's only like 3.5 hours away. This used to be a bigger deal than it is now, but it still kind of sucks. If you wanted to really shop for anything different or special, you had to drive to find it. These days, Amazon will drop off whatever you're looking for wherever you are. But there are still things that you might have to drive to. One thing that most people worry about, medical specialists. If they don't have what you need, as in treatment, you're in for like a 3.5 to 7 hour drive, maybe a couple times a month, and that sucks. They are just kind of out there by themselves. There's, like I said, there's little small towns, but no other major cities are within a couple hours away, and it kind of sucks sometimes. I have a few friends that live there, and they said that's their biggest problem with living there. They retired from the military at Fort Bliss, but they say it still sucks when you really need something like that. They're getting older, so they need specialists. It kind of blows. And number 1, it's a military town. El Paso is a military town. It has the Army's Fort Bliss kind of right in the middle of town. We all love the military. I'm not hassling them. I was in the Army, and I was at Fort Bliss a couple different times. But if you have never lived near a military base or have been in the military, especially when you were young, we could do some stupid things. We go out, we get drunk, we do stupid things. That's just kind of what you do when you're a young soldier. Actually, kind of what you do when you're young, but it's kind of tripled when you're a soldier. Locals tend to resent the soldiers because of this, but it's a double-edged sword for them. It helps their economy to have the base there and all the soldiers there, but they have to deal with our nonsense. Now, I know, I did it all the time. Trust me, it's a lot of nonsense. And besides Fort Bliss, you have Castner Range. This is an old range that's filled with unexploded ordnance that's near a popular hiking spot. For the non-military types out there, let me explain it to you. They have a big hill that they aren't sure where and how many things on that hill might explode if you get near them. So it's a problem. Apparently they've been trying to clean it up for years, but I wouldn't trust it. And the cherry on top of the El Paso military problem, 20 miles away, you have White Sands Missile Range. This is where they tested atomic bombs and actually blew some up. The area still has high levels of radiation, and it's only 20 miles away from El Paso. That's not good. Alright, so that's my top 10 reasons not to move to El Paso, Texas. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. El Paso is a great city. I've loved it all the time I was there. If you ever get a chance to visit there, try the food. You're gonna love it. As usual, don't forget the links below. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.